Council work session and pass it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Councilor Ye. As you know, we have one topic today. We committed to being out of here by 1 o'clock. So Michael Kinnison is now set up and ready to present to you. So I think I'll just ask you to get started, Michael.
Sure. Let me work on sharing my screen.
And now it won't work.
Let me know if you can see that. Great. Okay. Hello, Mayor and City Council. This is Michael Kinnison. I'm the manager of the Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement Office. And we're here today as a follow-up to the July 2020 work session to present a report on a process for soliciting input from communities of color on how the Community Safety Initiative can best respond to their needs. You will notice during my presentation today that I'm going to shift terminology away from the use of the term communities of color and instead reference Black, Indigenous people of color, or BIPOC. The term BIPOC acknowledges the unique identities and experience among non-white communities and centers the conversation on those communities that have historically faced some of the most severe forms of oppression. My use of the term communities of color will be limited to referencing specific language from Council's original motions. And I'm also going to stop my video so you don't have to look at me talk. Okay, so before we jump into the proposed process, let's take a quick look at how we got to where we are today. In 2016, City Council initiated a process to better understand community safety issues with the intention of addressing concerns about safety and livability through budget and policy actions. This work was based on 7 objectives endorsed by Council. There we go. There are the objectives. I won't read through all of those, but I would like to just highlight the last 2 objectives that are bolded there. I think they are the most pertinent to today's conversation. Involve, listen to, and build trust in the community, and work for adaptability of the system and ability to reevaluate and adjust as needed. In 2018, 4 sessions were held to understand current deficiencies within our current community safety system. We learned about the growing challenges facing our law enforcement, community safety, and court systems to keep up with the demand for services. And we gained a better understanding of the growing needs of mental health, homelessness, and other critical intervention and support programs. In 2018, a number of outreach activities were conducted to educate about the Community Safety Initiative and collect information about perceptions of safety and to help decide where to focus and prioritize resources. Activities included 2 surveys of city residents, 1 scientific phone survey and another online. Presentations at community group meetings. You can see the list of speaking engagements that were conducted on the slide. Staff were present at a number of community events. And that's a list of the events there on that slide. There also was a dedicated website and use of social print and broadcast media to supplement these activities. While some effort was made to inform BIPOC communities about the Community Safety Initiative, there was little opportunity provided to really listen and understand the specific needs and priorities of those communities and how best to address them. The current context around community safety, particularly as it relates to the experience of BIPOC communities, is different now than when the CSI was being developed. The killing of George Floyd back in May has sparked community interest in calls for police reform and rethinking of how public resources are used for community safety. The June 22nd public hearing on our proposed fiscal year 21 proposed budget included quite a bit of testimony on this issue. And in response, Council held a work session on July 20th to discuss community safety funding and passed a motion directing the city manager to convene workshops with organizations representing communities of color to specify changes or additions to the Community Safety Initiative that would best respond to the needs of their communities. And so that's what brings us to today. It is important to engage again with more intention with these communities at this critical moment in the public conversation around policing and community safety. And so let's talk a little bit about what we hope to achieve with this phase of engagement. We've identified three kind of overall goals for our process. First is to ensure that BIPOC organizations and leaders have an understanding about the CSI, a baseline kind of, if you will, about how it was developed, what it's trying to achieve, and how it is funded. A second goal is to provide a forum for BIPOC organizations to share their priorities and needs for community safety and provide feedback on how they feel the CSI can best respond to them. And finally, to provide information to you all that is actionable and can inform future decisions on building a community safety system that meets the needs of all of our community. We have developed an aggressive timeline in order to have information available to council as we approach the next budget cycle. Given the quick turnaround, we recommend that this phase of outreach to BIPOC communities be viewed as a starting point, a beginning, if you will. There have been many voices contributing to the framework for the CSI up to this point, and ongoing community dialogue will be important as we continue to build a more robust community safety system over time. Outreach efforts that specifically engage BIPOC communities will be a critical part of that ongoing engagement. Okay, let's move on to who will actually be invited to participate. We've identified about 25 different organizations in community to participate. I say invite because we have not actually extended invitations yet. We wanted to get through our conversations with you first. We also intend to invite participation of representatives from 4J and Bethel school districts, the U of O, and LCC, including a number of student-led organizations and key informal leaders whose work intersects with and supports BIPOC communities. We believe it's important to note that we have another process running concurrently that is looking at police policy, the ad hoc committee, and we anticipate some overlap in involvement by the representatives of participating organizations. I just want to mention this to acknowledge the time and effort that will be asked of these folks. It's not insignificant, and we appreciate their involvement. Let's talk a little bit about the actual process itself. So we're here in September getting direction from council on the proposed plan. Once we wrap up today's work session, we have a plan in place, then we will immediately get busy connecting with different organizations, scheduling and preparing for our first virtual information session. We'll host that first virtual session on the Community Safety Initiative in early October. It will be a webinar type presentation followed by open Q&A attended by key staff that have a deep understanding of the CSI, so they're able to answer a broad set of questions. The idea is that this will set a baseline of understanding about the CSI, its objectives, strategies, proposed allocation and funding mechanism. And the session will be recorded and posted to our website and available for viewing for those unable to attend, as well as the general public. We will then provide some time for participants to process what they heard, interact with their own constituents, and then submit additional questions. We intend to actively reach out to participants during this time to engage them in conversations and identify any additional information needs that they have. We will then host a second virtual session to address any remaining questions about the CSI and begin to listen to participants' feedback on their community's needs and priorities and how they align with the CSI. This session will also be recorded for later viewing. We will then provide additional time for processing and participants to provide their feedback on recommended changes or additions in writing. Again, we will actively solicit that feedback through staff contacts with participants to encourage as much input as possible and help us understand that input as much as is possible. We have not designed an overly prescriptive process. We want to keep some flexibility, knowing there are many stressors currently in the community now that present barriers to engaging. We have the fires, of course, we've got COVID, school is just starting. We have another significant process going on in parallel as well. And just the ongoing advocacy and struggle of BIPOC communities around racism and oppression presents its own stressors to folks. We're trying to balance scheduled virtual opportunities to engage as a group, time for participants to process and organize their feedback, and informal, more personal interactions within a short time period. We honestly don't know yet what kind of response we will have, and we want to be flexible and able to adjust to meet the needs of participants as best we can. And then finally, we will spend November compiling what we heard, analyzing that content, identifying themes, and then compiling that into a report. And our goal is to come back to council with that information before the Thanksgiving break. And then finally, we have a couple of motions queued up for you. The first one would allow you to essentially approve this process as presented in attachment A and reviewed here in the presentation. And then we have another motion to accommodate any other adjustments or changes that you'd like to make. And with that, that's the end of the presentation, and I'll turn it over for discussion.
Thank you so much, Mike, for that presentation and for the staff work. We realized that this is a major outreach to undertake in a very short time. And I personally am grateful that the word you used on the results is actionable, which sounds great. So I have Betty raising her hand, Alan, and then Alan, and then we'll go on. Go ahead, Betty.
Thank you. First, I want to know from Greg what his beautiful daughter is doing behind him. Is she crowning him? It looks as if she's putting.
No, that's a photograph of her playing against Churchill this year when she was playing basketball.
I thought she was crowning you.
Oh no.
Royally.
She's trying to block the girl from Churchill. So.
Okay, she's a beautiful girl. Okay, that was irrelevant, I suppose. Yeah. But I want to know, why are we having this group in addition to the special committee? My first question.
I believe we're responding to two separate motions that were passed by council. So the topics were divided, one focusing on policy, and the direction about an ad hoc committee was distinct and different than direction for us to outreach to organizations around the community safety initiative. So we have kind of two distinct motions running in tandem here.
Seems like you have the same communities pretty much. I see a lot of, you say, I saw the words all, I saw the word all. And you eliminate the enormous number of people from this group, of the majority of the whole city. But if you want to be exclusive, I wonder why you didn't include sponsors and all the people who represent our sister cities, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Russians, and the Nepalese. I don't see any of those groups included. But I think if we're going to have any workshops about community safety, it should include everybody in the city, whether they are people of minorities and also I wonder why Jewish people are listed as people of color. I don't think that's true. I don't know, but I don't know what the definition is, but I think that we should include everybody. And the first thing we should do is repeal the payroll tax, which is discriminatory for people who are almost poor or almost poor. And I think I want to know, how often are these workshops going to meet, and are they going to be paid also?
Well, I think that to your point about expanding who we reach out to, we certainly can make adjustments if council provides that direction today about if you have additions that you would like, additional groups you would like us to reach out to, we can do that. You will notice there are some groups like the Jewish Federation and some other groups that you may not think of distinctly as part of BIPOC community, but what we tried to do is work with our contact list within the Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement Office and identify groups that we know are closely aligned with or allies of the BIPOC community and have often been part of that community dialogue on those issues. And then in terms of compensation, no, we are not proposing compensation for this process. It's not as intensive and as long as the ad hoc committee. And currently we have 2 virtual sessions planned.
Thank you. I think if you're including everyone, it should be every neighborhood in the city. And I know there are things that people are very concerned about across the city. One is traffic, and one is the trashing of the city by transients. And those are big, that's what I'm hearing from lots of people. And also I think the police, if they're discussing police policies, I think that we should ask the police union to send some people if you're having them. I don't approve of the workshops, but I think the police should be involved if we're discussing them. Having been a teacher, I know when one teacher does something wrong, then people are attacking all teachers, and teachers should be involved in those things to defend themselves and to tell why something happens. But I think the police should be involved in anything about community safety. I really think instead of having workshops or that committee, and I'm running out of time, so I would like to be on the list in case there's more time. Thank you.
I'll add you for a second round, Betty, and turn this over to Alan and then Jennifer.
Did staff want to respond to anything that Betty said?
I guess I would say police will be involved in the sense that the chief will be present at our virtual sessions to answer any questions around the CSI. And just for clarification, that in this process, we're talking about the community safety initiative and that funding, use of that funding. We're not talking about police policy. That's the purview of the ad hoc committee.
I do know that.
Thanks. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems like invitation only workshops. Is that what we're intending to do, to get these 25 groups, invite them to the table?
Yes, we will invite these specific organizations to participate. The sessions anybody will be able to attend and listen to the sessions, but just to be able to manage those and to make sure that the voices the intention that we're trying to target, we will have specific representatives of organizations invited.
Yeah, so I agree with, we don't know what kind of participation we're going to get, but if we do get everybody, it's going to be a heck of a really long meeting. And if everybody gets to talk in 3 minutes apiece, just them saying their piece is a 90-minute meeting. And so I'm wondering if it doesn't make more sense to actually break this up into smaller groups where it's a little bit more functional, where you do multiple smaller ones, maybe 5 or 7 or something like that, as opposed to one big giant one or 2 big giant ones. Have you guys thought about that? I know you don't know what kind of participation you get, but I mean, I think a plan B might be breaking this up, because if everybody shows up, it's going to be I think going to be an ineffective meeting for getting input.
We've been through a variety of scenarios. I think the challenge we have is the timeline that we're trying to shoot for we've tried to design a process that would allow us to reach out as broadly as we can, but still come back to you to provide you some information that you would have for your budget conversations in beginning in December.
Yeah, I still think you need to think about Plan B, because if the first one doesn't go well, you might want to break it up into smaller groups. But that's the way I would do it. But I guess we'll see. The group seems like appropriate groups. The only one that's on the council ad hoc committee that's not on this list is 15th Night. Is that just an oversight, or?
We can add them to the list.
They're on the other group.
Yeah.
I worry a little bit about overtaxing all these groups though with all this stuff. And my final comment is, when I voted for this motion, I was thinking it wasn't just going to be exclusively these groups. That was the primary thing, but I do want to see some broader public input. So I'm wondering if in this process, we can't have an additional meeting that's a open public meeting that allows people to testify or make their own suggestions that aren't on these invited lists. If the other people are just in listening mode, they can't participate. So maybe there needs to be a broader public open mic meeting where people can say their piece or put in their comments or make recommendations, and we can compile that as well. Because this is just a limited section of the community. Important section, but still limited. That's not on the schedule right now.
Councilor Zelenka, I think that's because the motion was really specific that that the council wanted us to go out and do that. I'll have to go back and read the motion. I'm sure Catherine has it up, but I think that was what we understood the intent to be.
I do have the motion.
Yeah, it's in the AIS.
It's in the AIS.
Yeah.
At the
I just don't have it up right in front of me. So.
Yeah, it was kind of done quickly. So I'll probably add a motion and take motion B and add, unless the chair wants to add it in there, that we actually we add in another public meeting to solicit other organizations and other individuals' comments on this process as well. I think that would be a good idea.
Can I ask a clarifying question from Councilor Zelenka?
Sure.
So are you saying just from the broader community beyond the BIPOC community to comment on?
Yeah, open Big Tent, all comers, okay. Public meeting.
Okay.
That's it, Mayor. Thanks.
That's it. And I just wanted to toss in there, and maybe others will comment about whether there's a possibility of a survey instrument that would follow this as opposed to another public meeting. So just ponder that a little bit. We use that pretty effectively with the climate action plan. Okay, I have Jennifer and then Claire.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to appreciate this first stab. I think it's always, it was a little vague. The motion was a little vague. And I think perhaps, as Alan this is not what I expected to get back, but I appreciate the thought. So I went back and actually watched our session because I wanted to make sure my memory of what happened was stuck in reality. One of the things I was surprised was with the timeline. While I completely understand wanting to make some changes during the supplemental budget in December if we can, there was never a push from what I saw in the video or from to do that for this process that needed to be done, completely done on that timeline. In fact, Alan made quite a point of saying, we don't want to rush this. We want to get this right. So in my mind, this is a great part one of what should be a larger engagement plan. when I voted for going out and talking with organizations, that wasn't necessarily just the leadership. I intended and would expect that there would be built into this engagement plan time for them to go out to their communities and speak with them, perhaps even time for staff to be part of that, and then to come back together and talk about those conversations that they had. 1 month seems completely unrealistic during a pandemic to be able to get that type of information back from our community. If I liked your goals, the process goals, I think those were right on track, but I don't know how we're going to be building trust with our community if we're dedicating 1 month to their engagement. So as this is now, this is not enough for me. I'm okay with Alan's idea of having a broader public hearing type event, but even that is not enough for me. I think we need to put more effort into reaching out to these communities. I don't know exactly how we would do that. If we just need to extend this out to have a phase 2 that's attached to this first phase where we continue to talk to folks. But for me, this is not enough. It seems like instead of it seems like them are expected to be coming to us rather than an us going to them type engagement, which that we frequently do. I also had a question about the speaking events, the speaking engagements events. Did we collect feedback from that? I can't remember. I know that's been a couple years.
Yes. Michael, are you okay if I chime in? I don't know.
Yeah, please.
So on the speaking events, specifically some of the outreach we did, some of it was more targeted where Judge Allen and the chief were out talking to groups, letting them know sort of what we were trying to accomplish with the community safety initiative, making sure people are aware of the holistic approach. And I don't know specifically in those sessions that everybody was asked to fill out information. In some of the more public, broader settings, people had cards that they filled out. We also made sure that in our public speaking engagements that we talked to people about the survey and encouraged them to fill that out. And we did have a super high level amount of participation in the survey that we gathered. So the other thing I would say is we can what we were thinking is that this conversation is not finished with whatever this timeline for this process is. It's a start to start engaging and really starting to build and deepen our understanding, because we also anticipate that some of the information that comes up in the course of these conversations will take some further discussion and really understanding. One thing I think Michael mentioned, but I just want to stress, is that we also see this as a high engagement process where the staff that are working on this will be reconnecting with those groups and having those conversations and helping make sure that we get all of the information, not just from the leaders of those groups, but from what they're hearing from other folks within their groups or their agencies. And so we're expecting this to be a lot of connection and talking, but definitely if there's more time that we can establish a longer period of time for this, we're happy to do that. And it needs to feel right. And so, but based on kind of the timeline that we had heard about keeping things open where we could make some financial decisions about the budget, this was what we thought maybe we could accomplish in that timeline to do that, knowing that we would be coming back and doing more.
Okay, well, yeah, and I appreciate that. I don't see any reason why we need to give ourselves an arbitrary deadline of December. And I would like to see this plan expanded a little bit and spend some more time in connecting with these. I'm gonna need another round. I'm gonna shut up now.
Okay, Claire and then Chris.
Self-censorship.
Thank you, Mayor. Don't shut up, Councilor Ye. So thank you, Michael, for outlining this and for the work involved. I also like the process goals that you presented at the beginning there. I think those really reflect our intentions as a council in terms of what we're trying to do here. But I have similar critiques and concerns around the outlined for the actual process. So I mean, really, as it's outlined, there's a single listening session. The first session is an information dump, a baseline setting, a Q&A, and then the second session is where you're actually intending to listen and get feedback. And then you've got a process for continuing feedback after that, but I don't think that is quite the right approach. And I appreciate understanding the timeline that staff had in mind, supplemental budget, typically in December, but it doesn't have to be, right? So we can do a supplemental budget in January, February, or March as well. So I don't, this is our timeline. We can make it work. I don't think this work should be rushed, even if it's the beginning of an ongoing process. Right now, we have a discrete process that council is asked to have staff set up, and it shouldn't be rushed. It doesn't need to be rushed. I think rather than a big listening session, I would encourage this be recrafted to be more along the lines of focus groups of 10 or 12 people for an hour and a half or 2 hours each. That really is a way to get in depth with people, to really dig into what the issues are, what they want to communicate, to have a dialogue and get a deeper understanding than a big listening session with, possibly 35 people on a Zoom meeting. That just seems crazy. And then, to these other questions about, who else needs to be included. First of all, Michael, you showed us the list of who we already engaged with as we shaped the original public safety measure. And there were many neighborhood associations included there. And knowing how those meetings typically go, I am sure folks at those meetings gave feedback, and probably a lot of them engaged in the survey. So I don't think they need to be explicitly invited to this process. And then we've had a public hearing on this and a number of meetings to discuss it. And I feel like the point of this process is to engage those members of the public who've traditionally been less engaged or didn't believe their voices would be heard, i.e. marginalized communities. So I don't really feel we need an all-comers meeting as well in addition to this. So that's all I have right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Chris, you're up.
Thanks. First off, I'm reminded you can have it fast, cheap, or right, pick any two. And I think what we need to really relax on is the timeline. The time is not the critical element for me. Getting it done right and getting it done within the resource constraints we have, I think, are the more important elements. So for me, the number one is let's do this right. And I'm reminded for 20 years, I was involved in the United Way Community Needs Assessment, which was a process to try to determine what the community valued, what the community needed, what the community was aspiring to. And over the course of 20 years, we did it a variety of different ways, but some basic elements were always there that always made this very effective and work well. And it was less dependent on a giant forum where everybody would come and talk than it was on individualized, focused efforts. And so really what we did was a lot of individual interviews. And I think there's a real thought that should be considered in going out and individually interviewing some of these groups so that they have a chance candidly to talk to you about what they feel their needs are without having to filter things through some sort of a public process. But then in addition to that, you have, and Claire was absolutely right on the spot, focus groups. I think what you're trying to do with the workshops is really what a focus group does. And so I think you need to use more of a focus group model than a workshop model. I think you'll get better information. So that means you don't do just a few of them. You need to do a number of them, and you need to kind of make them focused within different, not necessarily just ethnic or religious or cultural groups, but also around particular issues. In terms of police or in terms of emergency response or in terms of social services. And so you can mix the groups up in a variety of ways, and you can do it both with populations and with issues. But don't scrimp on the focus groups, because cumulatively, they can provide you an enormous amount of information. I think what the mayor talked about in terms of some sort of a statistically valid survey is also a very useful thing to have. And that was also part of the needs assessment. So you do personal interviews, you would do focus groups to really hone in on things qualitatively. But at some point, you also had to have something that was statistically reliable, and maybe some sort of a community survey that could be done would be good. I think forums have their value. But in the current climate and the way things are, I don't know if you could successfully have the kind of forum where people would feel comfortable and satisfied once that forum was done. So I think that's an option. We could definitely look at doing some sort of a forum, but I think the first two are probably qualitatively and quantitatively going to really be more valuable for you. But don't worry about the timeline. Do it right.
Okay, thank you. We have Betty, Alan, and Jennifer, and Claire for second rounds. So Betty, take it away.
Thank you. Well, responding to what other people have said, it's a filter if we let these groups come between council and the public. And I think council should be the people talking about policy with the public. I think, and I still didn't get a comment about sponsors. If anybody knows about underrepresented people and people who've been discriminated against, it would be sponsors. They've done a lot for people who have been in prison and then are trying to reintegrate into society. And they have more problems probably than any other group. When you talk about all, including all the people, I think every part of the city should be included if we're getting comments. And I do think, as I've said before, as I've said many times, I've asked a number of times for us to have citywide committees about traffic, which is one of the biggest problems that people are concerned with. But that's one thing. But everybody in the city should be consult, all parts of the city, not just some neighborhood groups, if we're talking about changes to community safety. I think that we have talked forever about community policing and still don't have it. And that's something we should ask every part of the community about. Is that what we should be extending our efforts toward? I will be voting against this unless we change it to some workshops which include everybody, not just certain groups. Thank you.
Okay, Alan.
Could I just say one thing, Mayor?
Please.
So I think that for our experience in trying to engage with marginalized communities and BIPOC communities is that when we go about that in a really broad way, like, and we did, I mean, there was, just to remind you, there was a statistically valid phone survey conducted as part of the CSI outreach. And then there was a more qualitative online survey done. So we kind of have taken the flavor of community on the initiative. But our experience in trying to engage marginalized communities is that we often don't hear from them in those other processes. And so, trying to do a statistically valid survey may not get that. Doing things that are a little more personal, that they feel specifically invited to, that is targeting their community, is just much more effective at getting the input that you need. So I just wanted to say that.
Yes, thank you for that. And so now Alan and then Jennifer.
So the survey that the mayor is referring to, and I agree wholeheartedly, was really not a survey. It's really a solicitation of ideas. So it's a survey of ideas. The one that we did for the climate change, Mayor's Ad Hoc Climate Change Group, where we asked people what their ideas were, and we got a flood of really good ideas. We had so many we didn't even know what to do with them, and then we had to consolidate them. We got like 300 of them, and we consolidated that down into 75. So that's I wasn't thinking survey. I was thinking solicitation of ideas, because that's what we're trying to do here. So that type of thing I think is very appropriate in this, because we're trying to modify according to a completely new circumstance what the CSI should look like going forward. In that context, I think almost all of the input we got was valuable in crafting it. But once we got it crafted, the circumstances completely changed in my mind to a large degree, especially in a lot of people's minds. And so it's a new thing. It's now we're saying, okay, here's what we got. What do we want it to look like? What changes do we want to make? And for that, I think re-engaging the public, re-engaging the neighborhoods, and having other kinds of focus groups with people outside the communities of color is really important. It's not, this is definitely, I mean, the reason we put this motion forward is because we wanted to engage communities of color. And I appreciate what you guys brought back was exactly responsive to our motion. It was very narrow. It said, go out to the communities of color and do this thing. So I almost want to, play parent here and say, do what we thought, not what we said. And so what I think the council wants is to have it be a broader input, a solicitation about how we're going to deal with the CSI and how we're going to modify it. And that means bringing more people into the group, into the process. And so I think the folks that have talked about focus groups is exactly right on. They should be smaller, more discreet, and big giant forums like this, I don't think are going to solicit the kind of input that we really think is going to be very valuable and meaningful to us. So I think having multiple focus groups is a better way to go. And I think that the timeline, I was a little surprised by the timeline too. I didn't perceive this as a rush. In fact, I said that, and Jennifer mentioned it, that we actually need to be thoughtful about this and very thoughtful. So taking several months to do this is more what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking we'd be done in 1 month. I was thinking we would be, this would carry over into the first quarter. We're not even done with the ad hoc committee until January 31st anyway. So we're not going to take that up. So maybe the city manager can, instead of crafting a motion on the fly, which doesn't work very well, maybe the city manager can say, here's what I heard, and here's what we'll try to come back with a different option, as opposed to trying to craft something on the fly.
I have my hand raised, so when you think it's appropriate, I'll jump in.
Yeah, you can jump in right now if you want.
Okay. So, I think you're right. I think we did kind of target this to the motion language. And I've had conversations with several of you between times where I felt like there was some urgency around the supplemental budget process in December, that you felt like you wanted to make things move. So I actually put this timeline in because I thought, in order for you to make that decision, you really need some information. Without that, and I haven't heard from all of you, but without that, I think we could return with a different proposal for you to look at that takes this into account. I think I have a little, it's feeling like, based on what was a couple of you have said, you're essentially asking for a second full public engagement process around the CSI, which is really different than, hey, we want to go out and just talk to these communities. So if that's, I think maybe, if you have head nods, then our proposal will be like, how do we do some sort of second round of full community engagement to include and focus potentially significant effort in the BIPOC community? If that's kind of what you're looking for, and head nods, otherwise, I think we're going to need to bring you two proposals, one that's very specific to the BIPOC community and one that's broader. Only because I haven't heard from all of you.
What I was thinking about was focused, not completely wide open, but more focused.
Okay.
I have Greg who hasn't had a chance and then a couple of second rounds, but I do want to jump in here because this concept really came out of really the demand for, Alan used to use the word big tent when we were really in the responding to the Black Lives Matter and the demand for defunding the police. There was this question about what that would look like. There was a demand for you to adjust the budget. So we were, in my mind, trying to do two things. And one was to have a very targeted, responsive, accessible approach to the BIPOC community, to organizations that work on behalf of that BIPOC community and represent those interests. And the idea was to actually make it easier for them to look at that CSI and respond thoughtfully to us. And then the second thing was, I think the manager was correct in reading that we thought we were under pressure on the supplemental budget. There was a lot of anger about the budget being passed without those adjustments. And so that pressure was real. So those were the two intentions behind this, was to do both of those things. And I think it's fine to open it up, but remember that that was the original intent. I think that staff was responding to, and I agree that I don't think we need to do a whole separate engagement process, but I think we were trying to do a pretty targeted outreach to those organizations that represent communities of color. And that's the key thing not to lose here, and have that be washed over with some larger, more confusing process. So I'll just put that 2 cents in, and then it is Jennifer and then Clary. Oh no, Greg, I'm sorry. Greg, why don't you take your first round?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I represent multiple constituencies. I represent the folks in Ward 6. By extension, with all the rest of us, the entire, city community, but specifically, I'm talking about, the BIPOC community that essentially I'm the representative for on this body. And the mayor, I think, summarized it, very well. And I'll just say this. I can almost predict what will come out of those conversations, those workshops, is that we need to have more investment on the social service side. And we need to give some relief. And this is across the spectrum, whether you're liberal or you're conservative. I think most folks in this community recognize the fact that we have people on the street, homeless people that, we can't take care of. Our police are engaged in moving them around on a regular basis because of complaints and other things, not just from business people, but from neighborhoods as well. And, reallocating resources to a social service framework is something that people want to see happen, and not so much to police militaristic resources. Okay, I think part of that needs to be more money dedicated to training, and more money dedicated specifically to the hiring process, because I think we have problems there as well. If you don't do good hiring, you don't get good results with the people that you hire. So we really need to look at those things. And those are longer, broader conversations. But for right now, looking at where we're at, yes, we should move more money into cahoots. Yes, we really need to work closer with Lane County and the state around mental health services and addiction services and all the rest of that. And, and that's what I think the police want too, because police want to do police work, not social work. And that's what we need to do, is we need to help the police to narrow their focus and to make sure that they are, treating our communities in an equitable and fair way.
Thank you. And now I have Jennifer and Claire for second round.
Yes. So, Sarah, am I understanding that you're suggesting that you will come back with a second option? Okay, I would be very much in favor of doing that. I don't think we're going to solve this today. This is obviously not easy work, right? Figuring out the best way. I mean, I think we can acknowledge that. I know it's not an easy thing. I love the idea of a more focused group, small groups. That's kind of what I thought this was going to be initially, but again, we did not say that. So there was no way for you to unfortunately read our minds. I think it was Betty who mentioned, the council connecting with communities. I am more than happy, and I'm sure other councilors are well, to be involved in this process in some capacity. I don't think this needs to all fall on staff to make these connections and to be at these focus groups. I mean, personally, I guess I shouldn't speak for other people. I think that would be a good way for us to connect and to start building that trust with these communities that we are here to listen and we are interested. Oh, I had something somewhat unrelated. At the last time we talked about this, Claire brought up the idea of integrating in other funding sources like the marijuana tax. Is that planned to be included in this discussion? Is that no?
Well, I mean, I don't think that wasn't in the plan. I think the community safety initiative had some sort of specific areas in it that the marijuana tax can also fund. So I think talking about the community safety initiative, what we learned, and hearing what people's feedback, you can always divert any revenue sources to those things. I don't think it really changes the discussion of getting the feedback of what they need. Yeah.
Make sure we don't lose that somewhere, because I can see, I don't know, just not keeping that on our radar of other options for taxes, for funding. That is all I have. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Claire, one more comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So yeah, I support the idea of Sarah, taking the input we're giving her now and coming back to us with a modified proposal rather than us redrafting a motion today. Just a suggestion in terms of, the baseline, the presentation, to kind of give a baseline for folks who are part of these workshops or focus groups. There could be a big forum to do that. And then out of that, you could create a webinar or some kind of module, which I think you kind of did when we first did the community safety initiative, that helps explain it. And then people could watch that before they come to a focus group or additional conversation. And, listening to what Alan was saying about expanding the outreach beyond BIPOC communities, I could support that, but not at the expense of ensuring we hear explicitly from those marginalized groups. I think what Alan is speaking to is the fact that many more people of all races and backgrounds are now much more engaged in the issue and the racial justice implications of how we deliver community safety than were when we passed the original community safety initiative. So I think that's a valid point, that there should be a renewed way to let people give us feedback. And I think Councillor Evans is correct that we can anticipate to some extent some of the things that we're going to hear, because we've heard some of them already. But I think this process is deliberative in a way that just a public hearing is not, and has value for that reason. And I appreciate Councillor Ye asking about how the marijuana tax might relate to this, because we have dedicated that to community safety and I believe homelessness issues. I actually have a meeting at the end of this week with Mia to kind of talk about that and give her some of my thoughts on that. And my thinking is, one, we could, in the supplemental budget in December, potentially begin some of this work even before these workshops are completed. And then two, some of those revenues from the marijuana tax could be used to supplement what the ideas that come out of this work that we're asking city to engage in. So those are my additional thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Alan and Chris. So I had a special request from you that this meeting should not go longer than an hour. So Alan, you've asked for a third round, so I'm going to hold you short third round.
I really like the idea of a webinar setting. This is what we heard. This is what's in the CSI. This is what it exists. So everybody can. I just want to underscore the point that this is substantively different question than our first round of public involvement. Now that we have the CSI set, and the world really changed when George Floyd was murdered and the things that have happened since. Now the question is, what are we going to do differently given where we were? What are we going to do moving forward? And that, I think, merits a little broader than just the BIPOC community. I think the BIPOC community is extremely important to have, and this wouldn't be this would be in addition to supplement that as opposed to instead of. So I think we're asking for staff to do a hell of a lot more work, but it's the kind of information that we need. So I would have two parallel tracks, the BIPOC group and maybe some other groups, neighborhood groups, other kinds of community groups that were participated before, maybe that are informed about this could participate in it. So, and because I think I refer to this as what are we going to change in the CSI / budget on how we do things. So I agree, Greg, that the BIPOC community is going to ask for those things, but those are the exact same things I want to see too. And there's lots of people that aren't in the BIPOC communities that said the exact same thing. I think we're going to hear that over and over again, that's kind of the thrust we need to do. So I don't finally, I just wanted to say that I don't necessarily feel constrained by the fact that we have a scheduled supplemental budget in December. That's arbitrary. This needs to be thoughtful and it needs to be done right. And so scrubbing the supplemental budget, except for the things that we need to do mechanically, and moving this out into the first quarter of 21 makes a whole bunch of sense to me.
Chris, final comment?
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to reiterate, for me at least, it's important to be thoughtful rather than fast. And so whatever process we use, I think for me to make a good decision, it really has to be a thoughtful one and not one that is working to try to be fast. In terms of how broadly you go, I think we need to try to be as broad as we can, but I think at the same time, we need to be able to get good answers within focused questions. And some of the focused questions are ones that we heard about most recently. And Alan's right, there's been a sea change since May. And I think we need to acknowledge there's been a sea change since May. And how do we need to be thoughtful in reacting to that? So yeah, there will eventually be a time when we do want to talk about the broader implications of community safety. I think we do, and we need to look at it in terms of all the different parts. But the first part to me is responding to May in a thoughtful way and not in terms of what demands are made, but in terms of what ideas we need to consider. So that for me will be the real deciding point.
Okay, thank you all for this discussion. So I keep quoting this book that Sarah loaned to me called Upstream, and there is a kind of a guideline at the end of this book about dealing with upstream projects that says be impatient for action and patient for outcomes. And I do think that this conversation reflects that you're impatient for action and that you want these workshops to begin. We want to be responsive to community demands and changing landscape. And you want to be patient for the outcomes in terms of making sure that we're going in the right direction and doing the right thing. So I think this has been really an excellent conversation, and appreciate what staff has done to prepare it. We wouldn't have had such a focused conversation if you hadn't presented us with a well thought out plan, which we could deliberate over. So I appreciate that and look forward to the next conversation on this. And yes, Alan, did you want one?
Yeah, it's way easier to edit than create. So hats off to staff for starting the conversation. But can we have Sarah kind of tell us what she thinks she heard and how she's going to proceed?
Mm-hmm.
So what I heard is that we will return with a different proposal for you to look at that takes away an arbitrary December timeline and instead makes sure that we're being thoughtful, and that when you use the word workshop, what we may have seen was big room full of people, and what you actually intended was smaller table, more like a focus group type. So maybe not quite a focus group, but a smaller, a more intimate setting. So that you can expect that our proposal will have some sort of a mix of maybe those smaller groups for the BIPOC communities we've identified, along with a couple of, maybe we do the broader, bigger open workshop that's more community open to everybody. So we'll come back with something that has a timeline that is still keeps things moving forward, but doesn't hold us to December. Maybe a November check-in on just where we're at and what we're hearing, or December check-in.
Yeah, I think I would just want to second that I think it's really important for the community to know where we're going, and that we're not, that this is not a prolonged process, you know, with an indefinite timeline. So I think that's on us to consistently present that message that we're on this, and it won't go on forever. So with that, thank you all very much. Very, very good discussion, and look forward to the next round, and have a good afternoon. We'll see you tonight.
Thank you.
You're adjourned.